Noah Benton never expected his Tuesday night would change everything. Walking home from his janitor shift at First National Bank, he spots a woman collapsed beside a golden retriever in the rain. Most people would call 911 and keep walking. Noah doesn't. He cradles the unconscious stranger, her dog whimpering at his feet, and drives them both to the emergency room. As the doctors work, she grips his wrist with surprising strength. "I own this bank," she whispers through parched lips. "Don't let them take it." Noah assumes it's delirium. By morning he learns the truth. The woman he saved is Evelyn Armitage, heiress to the very bank where he mops floors. Her family wants her fortune, she wants her freedom, and somehow this single father, who barely makes rent, has become the key to both. But what Noah doesn't know yet is how far some people will go to silence the truth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the threadbare curtains of Noah Benton's kitchen window, casting familiar shadows across the worn linoleum floor. At 38, Noah had learned to find beauty in simple things. The way his daughter's hair caught the light as she bent over her cereal bowl, the satisfied purr of their old coffee maker, the quiet dignity of another day, begun with purpose. "Dad, did you really save someone's life last night?" Lily looked up from her breakfast, her dark eyes, so much like her mother's, bright with curiosity. At 11, she possessed that rare combination of childlike wonder and old-soul wisdom that never failed to humble Noah. Noah adjusted his worn work badge, the plastic laminate cracked from years of daily wear. The badge bore his name, his employee number, and a photo that looked nothing like the man he'd become. When he'd first pinned it on 5 years ago, he'd been a different person, defeated, desperate, carrying the weight of failures that had nearly broken him. Now, it represented something else entirely. Honest work, steady progress, and the slow rebuilding of a life worth living. "I helped someone who needed help," Noah said carefully, measuring coffee into their ancient Mr. Coffee machine. "That's what we do, isn't it? We help when we can." Lily nodded solemnly, as if filing away another piece of her father's quiet philosophy. She'd grown up on these lessons, not the grand pronouncements of ambitious parents, but the steady accumulation of small wisdoms from a man who'd learned that character was built in moments when no one was watching. Their apartment wasn't much, 2 bedrooms on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades, but Noah had made it a home. He'd painted every wall himself, refinished the second-hand furniture they'd accumulated over the years, and created spaces that spoke of care rather than wealth. Lily's room was a shrine to her dreams, posters of animals, veterinary textbooks borrowed from the library, and a collection of stuffed dogs that she'd outgrown but couldn't bear to donate. "Is she going to be okay? The lady you helped?" Lily's voice carried that particular concern children reserve for wounded creatures. Noah paused in his coffee preparation. "How did you explain to an 11-year-old that sometimes the people who seem to have everything are the ones who need the most help?" "I hope so, sweetheart. Sometimes adults have complicated problems. Like when Mom was sick." The question hung in the air, like morning mist. Noah's wife, Sarah, had died 4 years ago, not from any dramatic illness, but from the quiet erosion of addiction. Prescription pills that had started as legitimate pain relief and ended as something much darker. Noah had learned to talk about Sarah's death without bitterness, to help Lily remember her mother's laughter rather than her final struggles. "Different kind of complicated," Noah said gently. "But yes, sometimes adults need help, just like anyone else." Lily nodded and returned to her cereal, satisfied with the answer. Noah marveled at her resilience, her ability to process difficult truths without losing her essential optimism. She was the best part of him, the daily reminder that love could triumph over circumstance. At 7:30, Noah walked Lily to the bus stop, a routine that neighbors had come to depend on. Mrs. Rodriguez always waved from her window. Mr. Kim nodded from his morning walk. These small acknowledgements mattered in a neighborhood where people knew each other's names and watched out for each other's children. "Dad," Lily said as the yellow bus rounded the corner, "I'm proud of you." The words hit Noah with unexpected force. He knelt to her level, studying the serious expression on her face. "Why's that, kiddo?" "Because you're the kind of person who stops to help, even when it's raining, even when you're tired from work." Noah hugged her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the indefinable sweetness of childhood. "You're pretty great yourself, you know that?" The bus arrived with its familiar wheeze of brakes and hiss of opening doors. Lily climbed aboard, turning to wave through the window as she always did. Noah watched until the bus disappeared around the corner, then began his own journey to work. First National Bank occupied a corner building downtown, a structure that had been elegant in the 1950s and now carried the dignified weariness of an institution that had weathered multiple economic storms. Noah appreciated the building's honesty. It didn't pretend to be more than it was, but it served its purpose with quiet competence. "Morning, Noah." Beverly Martinez, the security guard, unlocked the employee entrance as Noah approached. At 62, Beverly had worked at the bank longer than anyone, and she'd appointed herself the unofficial mother figure to the younger staff members. "Morning, Bev. How's your grandson doing with his college applications?" Stressed out of his mind, but that's normal. Beverly's smile crinkled the corners of her eyes. "You know what's not normal? Having news crews outside yesterday asking about some big emergency. You know anything about that?" Noah paused in signing the employee log. Word traveled fast in their small community, but he hadn't expected the story to reach the bank so quickly. "I heard something on the radio. Some woman was found unconscious downtown." "Not just any woman." Beverly lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Evelyn Armitage. You know, the Armitage family, they basically own half the commercial real estate in the county." Noah nodded non-committally, but his mind was racing. The woman he'd helped, her whispered words about owning the bank, suddenly took on new significance. Could she have been speaking literally? The employee break room buzzed with conversation as Noah stored his lunch in the communal refrigerator. Janet Walsh from customer service was holding court, her voice animated with the thrill of insider knowledge. "I heard she was found practically dead," Janet was saying. "Dehydration, exhaustion, maybe something worse. The whole family's at the hospital now, apparently." "Wasn't she supposed to take over the bank?" asked Marcus, one of the younger tellers. "My girlfriend works at the law firm that handles their accounts. She said there's been all kinds of drama about succession planning." "Well, if she was that sick, maybe she's not fit to run anything," Janet replied, with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never faced real hardship. Noah felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. The woman he'd helped hadn't seemed unfit, confused. Yes, but there had been something in her eyes, a clarity that suggested her whispered words weren't random ravings. "Morning, Noah." Tom Brennan, the head of facilities, appeared with his usual clipboard and harried expression. "I need you to do a deep clean of the executive conference room today. We've got some important meetings coming up, and Mr. Whitmore wants everything perfect." Noah nodded, gathering his cleaning supplies from the custodial closet. He'd been working at the bank long enough to understand its rhythms, to know which executives were genuinely decent people and which ones treated service staff as invisible. The executive floor was its own ecosystem, with unspoken rules and careful hierarchies that Noah navigated with practiced diplomacy. As he worked his way through the building, Noah thought about the woman, Evelyn, and her desperate whisper. He'd seen enough desperation in his life to recognize the real thing. When Sarah had been dying, she'd gripped his hand with that same intensity, trying to communicate something essential before the medications took her coherence away. The executive conference room occupied a corner of the building's top floor, with windows that overlooked the town square where Noah had found Evelyn the night before. As he polished the long mahogany table, Noah could see the bus stop where she'd collapsed, could almost visualize the scene. A woman alone in the rain, her golden retriever standing guard. "Excuse me." The voice startled Noah from his thoughts. He turned to find a woman in an expensive suit standing in the doorway, her expression a careful blend of authority and courtesy. "I'm Victoria Whitmore, the bank's general counsel," she continued. "I understand you were involved in an incident. Last night?" Noah straightened, his hand tightening on the polishing cloth. "I helped someone who needed medical attention. That's all." Victoria studied him with calculating eyes. "Of course. Very commendable. I'm sure you understand that the bank values discretion from all our employees. Some situations are more complex than they appear." The words carried an unmistakable warning. Noah had heard similar language before, the careful phrasing that powerful people used when they wanted compliance without having to make explicit threats. "I understand," Noah said quietly. "Good." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The Armitage family appreciates your assistance, but they're handling the situation privately now. I'm sure you can appreciate their need for privacy during this difficult time." After she left, Noah continued his work with mechanical precision. But his mind churned with questions. Why was the bank's lawyer personally delivering warnings about discretion? What was the situation that needed handling? And why did the woman who'd whispered about owning the bank seem to need protection from her own family? The rest of his shift passed in a blur of routine tasks and troubling thoughts. Noah mopped floors, emptied trash cans, and cleaned bathrooms. With the same methodical care he brought to everything, but part of his attention remained fixed on the mystery of Evelyn Armitage. At closing time, Noah gathered his things and prepared for the walk home. But something made him detour past the hospital. He told himself it was simple concern, the basic human need to know that someone you'd helped was recovering. But as he stood in the visitor parking lot, looking up at the lit windows of the medical tower, Noah wondered if he was crossing a line he couldn't uncross. The evening air carried the promise of more rain, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a sound that reminded Noah of golden fur and loyal eyes, of a moment when doing the right thing had felt as natural as breathing. He thought of Lily's words that morning. "You're the kind of person who stops to help." It was both a compliment and a responsibility, a recognition that character wasn't something you possessed, but something you demonstrated, one choice at a time. Tomorrow, Noah decided, he would find a way to check on Evelyn Armitage. Not because he wanted to get involved in whatever complicated situation surrounded her, but because when someone gripped your hand and whispered desperate words in their moment of greatest vulnerability, you didn't just walk away and pretend it never happened. The walk home took him past the bus stop where he'd found her, past the spot where an ordinary Tuesday night had become something else entirely. Noah paused there for a moment, remembering the weight of an unconscious woman in his arms, the trust of a frightened dog, and the whispered words that had started to reshape his understanding of the world around him. Some people might call it coincidence, but Noah had learned to recognize the moments when life offered you a choice between safety and significance. Standing there in the gathering darkness, he realized that helping Evelyn Armitage hadn't been the end of something, it had been the beginning. The morning news shattered Noah's careful routine like a stone through glass. He'd been buttering Lily's toast when the anchor's voice cut through the kitchen's comfortable quiet. Local heiress Evelyn Armitage remains in critical condition after being found unconscious downtown Tuesday evening. The 34-year-old daughter of banking magnate Charles Armitage was discovered by a Good Samaritan and rushed to Mercy General Hospital. Noah's hand stilled on the butter knife. The toast grew cold as the reporter continued, painting a picture that felt both familiar and foreign. Yes, he'd found a woman. Yes, he'd taken her to the hospital. But this clinical recounting stripped away the humanity of the moment, the rain-soaked golden retriever, the desperate grip of her fingers, the whispered confession that had seemed like delirium. The Armitage family has requested privacy during this difficult time, the reporter concluded. Miss Armitage is expected to make a full recovery. Lily looked up from her cereal with bright curiosity. Dad, isn't that the lady you helped? Noah nodded, his throat suddenly tight. Seems like it. She's rich, isn't she? Like, really rich. Money doesn't make you more or less deserving of help, Noah said carefully, though his mind raced with the implications. Evelyn Armitage hadn't just been speaking metaphorically about the bank. She was literally connected to it, part of a family whose name appeared on the building's cornerstone. The walk to Lily's bus stop felt different that morning, as if the familiar neighborhood had shifted slightly off its axis. Mrs. Rodriguez's wave seemed more knowing, Mr. Kim's nod more respectful. Had word already spread about Noah's involvement, or was he simply more aware of the scrutiny that came with proximity to the Armitage name? At the bank, the atmosphere crackled with subdued excitement. Beverly Martinez unlocked the employee. Entrance with unusual efficiency, her movements sharp with barely contained energy. Noah, there you are. She pulled him aside as he signed the employee log. Mr. Whitmore wants to see you in his office. 10 minutes. Noah's stomach dropped. Richard Whitmore was the bank president, a man who existed in a realm so far above Noah's daily experience that they'd never exchanged more than polite greetings. Being summoned to his office felt like being called to the principal's office, but with far higher stakes. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt endless. Noah had cleaned these offices countless times, but entering as a summoned employee rather than invisible maintenance staff transformed the familiar space into something intimidating. Whitmore's secretary, a severe woman named Patricia, gestured toward the closed office door without looking up from her typing. Go right in. He's expecting you. Richard Whitmore's office was a study in understated power. Leather-bound books, expensive artwork, and a desk that probably cost more than Noah's annual salary. The man himself was tall and lean, with silver hair, and the kind of presence that came from decades of making decisions that affected other people's lives. Mr. Benton, please sit. Whitmore's voice carried the careful modulation of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I understand you were involved in Miss Armitage's situation Tuesday evening. Noah chose his words carefully. I found someone who needed medical help and took her to the hospital. Of course, very commendable. Whitmore stepped to the window, gazing out at the town square. The Armitage family is grateful for your assistance. They're also concerned about maintaining their privacy during this difficult time. I understand. Do you? Whitmore turned back to face him, and Noah caught something calculating in his expression. The Armitage family has been through considerable stress recently. Miss Armitage has been struggling with certain personal issues. Her family is working to ensure she receives the care she needs. The words carried implications that made Noah's skin crawl. He'd heard similar language before. The careful phrasing that made weakness sound like protection and control sound like care. She seemed lucid when I found her, Noah said quietly. Whitmore's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. I'm sure she did, but appearances can be deceiving, particularly when someone is under significant stress. The important thing is that she's receiving appropriate care now. Is she? The question slipped out before Noah could stop it. I beg your pardon. Noah felt as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff, but something in Evelyn's desperate whisper pushed him forward. Is she receiving appropriate care, or is she being managed? The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. When Whitmore spoke again, his voice carried the chill of winter air. Mr. Benton, you've been a valued employee for 5 years. Your work ethic is exemplary, and your dedication to your daughter is admirable. It would be unfortunate if a momentary lapse in judgment affected your employment here. The threat hung in the air, polite but unmistakable. Noah thought of Lily, of their modest but stable life, of the health insurance and steady paycheck that had allowed him to rebuild after Sarah's death. He thought of all the practical reasons to nod and apologize and retreat to the safety of his custodial duties. Instead, he thought of a woman's fingers gripping his wrist, of words whispered with desperate urgency. "Don't let them take it." "I understand your concerns," Noah said carefully, "but I also understand that sometimes the people who seem to have everything are the ones who need help most." Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Miss Armitage's family is quite capable of determining what help she needs." "I'm sure they are." The interview ended with forced pleasantries and veiled warnings. Noah returned to his duties with a sense of crossing a line he couldn't uncross. He'd spent 5 years building a reputation as a reliable, non-controversial employee. In the space of a single conversation, he'd jeopardized that carefully constructed stability. But as he cleaned offices and emptied trash cans, Noah found himself paying attention to conversations he'd previously ignored. The Armitage name came up repeatedly, in hushed discussions about succession planning, in worried speculation about the bank's future, in carefully neutral observations about family dynamics. "I heard they're having her evaluated," one executive said to another as Noah cleaned nearby. "Competency hearing, that sort of thing. Unfortunate, but probably necessary. She's always been unstable. The family's been worried about her for years. This just confirms their concerns." Noah's hands stilled on his cleaning supplies. The picture being painted was of a troubled woman whose collapse had been inevitable, whose family's intervention was both natural and necessary. But it clashed with the memory of intelligent eyes and purposeful words, of a woman who'd managed to communicate something essential even in her moment of greatest vulnerability. That afternoon, Noah made a decision that would have seemed impossible. Just days before, he used his lunch break to visit Mercy General Hospital, not as a good Samaritan checking on a patient's progress, but as someone who recognized the difference between being protected and being silenced. The hospital's visiting hours were strictly controlled, but Noah had learned, during Sarah's illness, that there were always ways to get information if you knew how to ask. He found Dr. Elizabeth Chen in the third-floor break room, reviewing charts, with the focused intensity of someone who took her responsibilities seriously. "Excuse me, Doctor, I'm Noah Benton. I'm the one who brought Miss Armitage in Tuesday night." Dr. Chen looked up, her expression shifting from professional courtesy to genuine interest. "Mr. Benton, I was hoping I'd have a chance to thank you. Your quick response quite possibly saved her life." "How is she?" "Improving. The dehydration was severe, but she's responding well to treatment. Physically, she should make a full recovery." Noah heard the careful emphasis on the word physically. "And mentally?" Dr. Chen's expression grew guarded. "That's complicated. Her family has raised concerns about her mental state. They've requested a psychiatric evaluation. What do you think?" The question hung between them. Dr. Chen glanced around the empty break room, then lowered her voice. "Off the record, she's lucid, articulate, and fully aware of her situation. Her collapse was caused by physical exhaustion and dehydration, not mental illness. But her family seems convinced otherwise. Can I see her?" "She's been placed on a restricted visitor list, family only, by request of her legal guardians." "Legal guardians." "Her parents were granted temporary guardianship while she's incapacitated. Standard procedure in cases like this." Noah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. "Cases like what?" Dr. Chen's silence spoke volumes. When she finally answered, her words carried the weight of frustration. "Cases where family members have concerns about a patient's decision-making capacity. Even when the patient is clearly competent, the legal system errs on the side of caution, Mr. Benton, particularly when significant financial interests are involved." Noah left the hospital with more questions than answers, but with a growing certainty that Evelyn Armitage's whispered words hadn't been delirium. They'd been a plea for help from someone who understood that her family's concern was actually something much darker. That evening, as he helped Lily with her homework, Noah found himself thinking about the different kinds of prisons people created for each other. Some were built with bars and locks, others with legal documents and medical opinions. But they all served the same purpose, to keep someone powerless while appearing to protect them. "Dad, you're not listening," Lily said, bringing him back to the present. "Sorry, sweetheart. My mind was somewhere else." "Are you worried about the lady you helped?" Noah considered the question carefully. "I'm worried about a lot of things, but mostly I'm thinking about what it means to really help someone." "What do you mean?" "Sometimes helping someone once isn't enough. Sometimes you have to keep helping, even when it's hard or scary or complicated." Lily nodded with the seriousness of someone who'd learned early that life rarely offered simple answers. "Like when Mum was sick?" "Like when Mum was sick," Noah agreed. "And like now, maybe." As Lily returned to her homework, Noah stared out their apartment window at the city lights below. Somewhere in those lights, a woman was fighting for her freedom while her family fought to take it away. Somewhere, a golden retriever was probably wondering why his human wasn't coming home. And somewhere in the careful balance of his own life, Noah was discovering that some choices couldn't be made safely from a distance. Sometimes, to truly help someone, you had to be willing to risk everything you'd built to keep them from losing everything they were. The hospital bracelet he'd glimpsed on Evelyn's wrist that night had borne her name, her birth date, and a patient number. But it had also been a symbol of something else, the moment when someone's entire existence could be reduced to a medical case, when their voice could be dismissed as symptoms, and their wishes could be overruled by people who claimed to know better. Noah had seen that kind of reduction before, in the final months of Sarah's life, when the addiction had given others the right to make decisions for her. He'd learned then that sometimes the most important thing you could do for someone was to see them as fully human when the world insisted on seeing them as broken. Tomorrow, he decided, he would find a way to see Evelyn Armitage as more than a patient number or a family problem. He would find a way to listen to what she was really trying to say, even if it meant risking everything he'd worked so hard to build. The choice, he realized, had been made the moment he'd stopped to help a stranger in the rain. Everything since then had been just the beginning of understanding what that choice really meant. The leather collar arrived on Thursday morning, delivered by a hospital orderly who seemed as puzzled by the errand as Noah was by receiving it. The worn leather bore a simple brass nameplate, Thistle, along with an address Noah didn't recognize and a phone number written in careful script. "Lady in room 314 asked me to bring this to the janitor who helped her," the orderly explained with a shrug. "Said you'd understand." Noah turned the collar over in his hands, feeling the softness that came from years of wear. It wasn't just a dog collar. It was a message, a connection, and quite possibly a cry for help wrapped in worn leather and brass. The address led him to a veterinary clinic on the east side of town, a modest building with a hand-painted sign that read, "Dr. Maria Santos de Viemi." When Noah arrived that evening after work, he found a golden retriever in a kennel in the back, his coat dull with anxiety, and his eyes holding the particular sadness that dogs wear when they don't understand why their human hasn't come home. "You must be Noah," Dr. Santos said, emerging from an examination room with tired eyes and gentle hands. "Thistle's been waiting for you." "How did you know?" "Miss Armitage called yesterday. Asked me to watch him until someone came with his collar." Dr. Santos opened the kennel door, and Thistle padded out slowly, his tail offering a tentative wag of recognition. She said, "You were someone she could trust." Noah knelt to the dog's level, letting Thistle sniff his hands before scratching behind his ears. The retriever leaned into the touch with desperate gratitude, a creature who understood loyalty even when the world stopped making sense. "How is she, really?" Noah asked, keeping his voice low. Dr. Santos glanced around the empty clinic, then sat heavily in a nearby chair. "Evelyn's been bringing Thistle here for 3 years. Always paid cash, always seemed careful, like she was trying not to leave too much of a trail." "What do you mean?" "I mean, she acted like someone who didn't entirely trust the people around. Asked me once if I'd be willing to keep Thistle if something happened to her. I thought it was just the kind of hypothetical question pet owners ask, but now it seemed like preparation. Noah studied Thistle's intelligent eyes and wondered what the dog had witnessed, what secrets were locked behind that loyal gaze. She also left this. Dr. Santos handed Noah a sealed envelope with his name written in the same careful script as the phone number on the collar. Said if you came for Thistle, I should give it to you. Noah's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note that made his heart race. Noah, if you're reading this, then my family has succeeded in keeping me isolated. Thistle knows where I keep important documents. He's been trained to find them. Please trust him, and please don't trust anyone else. The bank isn't just my inheritance. It's the lifeline for hundreds of families in our community. They can't be allowed to destroy that. What does it say? Dr. Santos asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the gravity of the situation. Noah folded the note carefully. It says, I'm about to get in over my head. That evening, Noah sat at his kitchen table while Lily did homework, and Thistle lay at his feet with the contentment of a dog who'd found his temporary pack. The retriever had adapted to their small apartment with surprising grace, as if he understood that this was a way station rather than a destination. Dad, can we keep him? Lily asked for the third time, her math homework forgotten in favor of watching Thistle's every movement. He belongs to someone else, sweetheart. We're just taking care of him for a while. But what if his owner can't take care of him anymore? The question hit closer to home than Lily realized. What if Evelyn's family succeeded in having her declared incompetent? What happened to the people and dogs who depended on someone the world had decided was unfit to make decisions? Then we'll figure out what's best for everyone involved, Noah said carefully. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Noah found himself studying Thistle with new understanding. The dog wasn't just a pet. He was a trained ally, possibly the only witness to whatever had led to Evelyn's collapse. If the note was accurate, Thistle might be the key to understanding what Evelyn's family was trying to hide. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors. Noah was getting ready for work when Beverly Martinez called, her voice tight with concern. Noah, don't come in through the main employee entrance today. There are lawyers here asking questions about you, something about the Armitage situation. Noah's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? Your employment history, your access to confidential areas, whether you've ever been in trouble with the law? Mr. Whitmore's been in meetings with them since 8 o'clock. Noah hung up and stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face, looking back at him, was that of a man who'd tried to do the right thing and was now paying the price for that decency. But alongside the fear, he saw something else, a determination that surprised him with its intensity. He called in sick to work, the first time he'd done so in 3 years. Then he loaded Thistle into his old Honda and drove to the address from Evelyn's note, a modest house in a residential neighborhood that looked nothing like what he'd expected. From someone wealthy enough to own a bank. The house was locked, but Thistle led him confidently to a garden shed in the backyard. Inside, hidden beneath bags of mulch and gardening tools, was a waterproof container that Thistle nosed with obvious purpose. Noah's hands shook as he opened the container. Inside were financial documents, legal papers, and what appeared to be correspondence between Evelyn and various bank board members. The picture that emerged was of a young woman fighting desperately to honor her late grandfather's vision, while family members systematically undermined her authority. One letter, dated just 2 weeks before Evelyn's collapse, was particularly damning. Evelyn, your idealistic notions about community banking are costing us millions in potential profits. The board has lost confidence in your leadership. Step aside gracefully, or we'll be forced to take action. Your recent behavior gives us ample grounds for a competency challenge. Uncle Charles Noah sat back on his heels, the full scope of the situation crystallizing around him. This wasn't about a troubled heiress needing family intervention. This was about a power struggle disguised as concern, a hostile takeover wrapped in the language of mental health. But understanding the situation and knowing what to do about it were entirely different challenges. Noah was a janitor with a high school education, not a lawyer or a financial expert. What could he possibly do against a family with unlimited resources and decades of experience in manipulating legal systems? The answer came from an unexpected source. As he sat in Evelyn's garden shed, surrounded by evidence of her family's betrayal, Thistle placed his head on Noah's knee and looked up with eyes that held absolute trust. The dog didn't care about Noah's credentials or his bank account or his place in the social hierarchy. Thistle cared about loyalty, about standing by someone who needed help, about the simple truth that sometimes being right mattered more than being safe. Noah gathered the documents carefully, knowing that he was crossing another line in what was becoming a series of irreversible choices. He thought about Lily, about the stable life he'd built for them, about all the practical reasons to put the papers back and walk away. Instead, he thought about a woman's desperate whisper in a hospital emergency room, about a dog's unwavering loyalty, about the difference between protection and control. Sometimes, Noah realized, the most important battles were fought not by the people with the most power, but by the people with the most to lose who chose to fight anyway. As he drove home with Thistle beside him and Evelyn's secrets in his trunk, Noah knew that his quiet life as an invisible maintenance worker was over. He was about to step into a world where his daughter's hero worship might be put to the ultimate test, where doing the right thing might cost them everything they'd worked to build. But for the first time since Sarah's death, Noah felt truly alive. He was no longer just surviving. He was choosing to matter, to stand for something bigger than his own safety. And if that choice led to consequences he couldn't control, at least it would be his choice to make. The worn leather collar on the seat between them seemed to pulse with possibility, a symbol of the bonds that connected people and animals across all the artificial barriers that society created. Tomorrow, Noah would have to figure out how to use what he'd learned to help someone who couldn't help herself. Tonight, he would simply be grateful for the trust of a golden retriever. The leather collar arrived on Thursday morning, delivered by a hospital orderly who seemed as puzzled by the errand as Noah was by receiving it. The worn leather bore a simple brass nameplate, Thistle, along with an address Noah didn't recognize, and a phone number written in careful script. "Lady in room 314 asked me to bring this to the janitor who helped her," the orderly explained with a shrug. "Said you'd understand." Noah turned the collar over in his hands, feeling the softness that came from years of wear. It wasn't just a dog collar. It was a message, a connection, and quite possibly a cry for help wrapped in worn leather and brass. The address led him to a veterinary clinic on the east side of town, a modest building with a hand-painted sign that read, Dr. Maria Santos de Viemi. When Noah arrived that evening after work, he found a golden retriever in a kennel in the back, his coat dull with anxiety, and his eyes holding the particular sadness that dogs wear when they don't understand why their human hasn't come home. "You must be Noah," Dr. Santos said, emerging from an examination room with tired eyes and gentle hands. "Thistle's been waiting for you." "How did you know?" "Miss Armitage called yesterday. Asked me to watch him until someone came with his collar." Dr. Santos opened the kennel door, and Thistle padded out slowly, his tail offering a tentative wag of recognition. "She said you were someone she could trust." Noah knelt to the dog's level, letting Thistle sniff his hands before scratching behind his ears. The retriever leaned into the touch with desperate gratitude, a creature who understood loyalty even when the world stopped making sense. "How is she, really?" Noah asked, keeping his voice low. Dr. Santos glanced around the empty clinic, then sat heavily in a nearby chair. "Evelyn's been bringing Thistle here for 3 years, always paid cash, always seemed careful, like she was trying not to leave too much of a trail." "What do you mean?" "I mean, she acted like someone who didn't entirely trust the people around her. Asked me once if I'd be willing to keep Thistle if something happened to her." I thought it was just the kind of hypothetical question pet owners ask, but now it seemed like preparation. Noah studied Thistle's intelligent eyes and wondered what the dog had witnessed. What secrets were locked behind that loyal gaze? She also left this. Dr. Santos handed Noah a sealed envelope with his name written in the same careful script as the phone number on the collar. Said if you came for Thistle, I should give it to you. Noah's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note that made his heart race. Noah, if you're reading this, then my family has succeeded in keeping me isolated. Thistle knows where I keep important documents. He's been trained to find them. Please trust him, and please don't trust anyone else. The bank isn't just my inheritance. It's the lifeline for hundreds of families in our community. They can't be allowed to destroy that. What does it say? Dr. Santos asked, though her expression suggested she already suspected the gravity of the situation. Noah folded the note carefully. It says, I'm about to get in over my head. That evening, Noah sat at his kitchen table while Lily did homework, and Thistle lay at his feet with the contentment of a dog who'd found his temporary pack. The retriever had adapted to their small apartment with surprising grace, as if he understood that this was a way station rather than a destination. Dad, can we keep him? Lily asked for the third time, her math homework forgotten in favor of watching Thistle's every movement. He belongs to someone else, sweetheart. We're just taking care of him for a while. But what if his owner can't take care of him anymore? The question hit closer to home than Lily realized. What if Evelyn's family succeeded in having her declared incompetent? What happened to the people and dogs who depended on someone the world had decided was unfit to make decisions? Then we'll figure out what's best for everyone involved, Noah said carefully. Later that night, after Lily had gone to bed, Noah found himself studying Thistle with new understanding. The dog wasn't just a pet. He was a trained ally, possibly the only witness to whatever had led to Evelyn's collapse. If the note was accurate, Thistle might be the key to understanding what Evelyn's family was trying to hide. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors. Noah was getting ready for work when Beverly Martinez called, her voice tight with concern. Noah, don't come in through the main employee entrance today. There are lawyers here asking questions about you. Something about the Armitage situation. Noah's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? Your employment history, your access to confidential areas, whether you've ever been in trouble with the law. Mr. Whitmore's been in meetings with them since 8 o'clock. Noah hung up and stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at him was that of a man who tried to do the right thing and was now paying the price for that decency. But alongside the fear, he saw something else. A determination that surprised him with its intensity. He called in sick to work, the first time he'd done so in 3 years. Then he loaded Thistle into his old Honda and drove to the address from Evelyn's note. A modest house in a residential neighborhood that looked nothing like what he'd expected from someone wealthy enough to own a bank. The house was locked, but Thistle led him confidently to a garden shed in the backyard. Inside, hidden beneath bags of mulch and gardening tools, was a waterproof container that Thistle nosed with obvious purpose. Noah's hands shook as he opened the container. Inside were financial documents, legal papers, and what appeared to be correspondence between Evelyn and various bank board members. The picture that emerged was of a young woman fighting desperately to honor her late grandfather's vision, while family members systematically undermined her authority. One letter, dated just 2 weeks before Evelyn's collapse, was particularly damning. Evelyn, your idealistic notions about community banking are costing us millions in potential profits. The board has lost confidence in your leadership. Step aside gracefully or we'll be forced to take action. Your recent behavior gives us ample grounds for a competency challenge. Uncle Charles Noah sat back on his heels, the full scope of the situation crystallizing around him. This wasn't about a troubled heiress needing family intervention. This was about a power struggle disguised as concern. a hostile takeover wrapped in the language of mental health. But understanding the situation and knowing what to do about it were entirely different challenges. Noah was a janitor with a high school education, not a lawyer or a financial expert. What could he possibly do against a family with unlimited resources and decades of experience in manipulating legal systems? The answer came from an unexpected source. As he sat in Evelyn's garden shed, surrounded by evidence of her family's betrayal, Thistle placed his head on Noah's knee and looked up with eyes that held absolute trust. The dog didn't care about Noah's credentials or his bank account or his place in the social hierarchy. Thistle cared about loyalty, about standing by someone who needed help, about the simple truth that sometimes being right mattered more than being safe. Noah gathered the documents carefully, knowing that he was crossing another line in what was becoming a series of irreversible choices. He thought about Lily, about the stable life he'd built for them, about all the practical reasons to put the papers back and walk away. Instead, he thought about a woman's desperate whisper in a hospital emergency room, about a dog's unwavering loyalty, about the difference between protection and control. Sometimes Noah realized the most important battles were fought not by the people with the most power, but by the people with the most to lose, who chose to fight anyway. As he drove home with Thistle beside him and Evelyn's secrets in his trunk, Noah knew that his quiet life as an invisible maintenance worker was over. He was about to step into a world where his daughter's hero worship might be put to the ultimate test, where doing the right thing might cost them everything they'd worked to build. But for the first time since Sarah's death, Noah felt truly alive. He was no longer just surviving. He was choosing to matter, to stand for something bigger than his own safety. And if that choice led to consequences he couldn't control, at least it would be his choice to make. The worn leather collar on the seat between them seemed to pulse with possibility, a symbol of the bonds that connected people and animals across all the artificial barriers that society created. Tomorrow, Noah would have to figure out how to use what he'd learned to help someone who couldn't help herself. Tonight, he would simply be grateful for the trust of a golden retriever and the knowledge that sometimes the most important fights chose you rather than the other way around. The fountain pen lay across Evelyn's hospital bed table like a bridge between past and present, its silver surface worn smooth by decades of important signatures. Noah recognized it immediately from the photographs in the documents Thistle had led him to. The same pen that had signed the bank's original charter, the same one that had built a legacy now under siege. "My grandfather carried this for 40 years, Evelyn said, her voice stronger than it had been during their brief first meeting. She looked different in the afternoon light, less fragile, more determined, though the hospital gown and IV line served as stark reminders of her vulnerability. He used to say that a person's signature was their bond, and the pen that carried it should be worthy of that responsibility. Noah had managed to visit by the simple expedient of arriving during shift change, when the nursing staff was too busy to check visitor lists carefully. Dr. Chen had seen him in the hallway and offered only a slight nod of acknowledgement. Not approval, exactly, but an understanding that some rules existed to be carefully bent. "I found the documents," Noah said quietly, glancing toward the door. "Thistle led me right to them." Evelyn's eyes brightened with something between relief and fear. "Then you know. You understand what they're trying to do." "I understand they want control of the bank. What I don't understand is why they think they can get away with it." Evelyn lifted the fountain pen, turning it slowly in the light. "Because they've done it before. Not exactly this, but my cousin Marcus was supposed to inherit part of the business when he turned 30. Instead, the family had him declared incompetent after a few bad investment decisions. He's been in and out of treatment facilities for 5 years now, signing whatever they put in front of him." Noah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. "And you think they'll do the same to you?" "I know they will." Evelyn's grip tightened on the pen. "They've been building a case for months. Every time I challenged their decisions about the bank, they documented it as erratic behavior. Every time I insisted on maintaining our community programs instead of maximizing profits, they called it poor judgment. They've been very patient, very thorough, but you're not incompetent. Anyone can see that. Competency isn't about intelligence, Noah. It's about control. If they can convince a judge that I'm unable to make sound financial decisions, they can take everything my grandfather built and turn it into just another profit machine. Noah studied her face, seeing not the fragile heiress from the news reports, but a woman fighting for something larger than herself. Tell me about your grandfather's vision. Evelyn's expression softened, and for a moment she looked younger, less burdened by the weight of family expectations and corporate betrayal. He believed that a bank should serve its community, not the other way around. When he founded First National, it was because the big banks wouldn't lend to working families, wouldn't invest in local businesses, wouldn't see the potential in people who didn't have perfect credit or family connections. She gestured toward the window, though from her bed she couldn't see the town square where Noah had found her. Half the businesses downtown got their start with loans from our bank. We've helped hundreds of families buy their first homes, sent countless kids to college, kept the community hospital running when the state wanted to close it. That's what banking should be, a tool for building something better, not just extracting wealth. And your family wants to change that. They want to sell to First Interstate. It would make them all very rich and eliminate what they see as my grandfather's sentimental mistakes. The community programs would disappear, the lending standards would tighten, and within 5 years, this would become just another town where working people can't afford to live. Noah thought about his own experience with banks, the impersonal institutions that had turned him away when he'd needed help most, the bureaucratic maze he'd navigated after Sarah's death, the casual cruelty of systems designed to protect wealth rather than build it. First National had been different. They'd worked with him when other banks had seen only risk. What can I do? The question surprised him with its immediacy. But Noah realized he'd already made the decision. This wasn't just about helping one woman. It was about preserving something valuable in a world that seemed determined to reduce everything to profit margins. I need you to get me out of here. Evelyn's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Not permanently. I know I need medical supervision for a few more days. But I need to attend the emergency board meeting they've called for Monday. If I'm not there to defend myself, they'll push through the competency proceedings without any real opposition. How can I possibly... Dr. Chen, she's been asking questions about my treatment, expressing concerns about the family's interference. In my medical care, if someone she trusted vouched for a temporary release, say, for a few hours to handle urgent legal matters, she might be willing to facilitate it. Noah felt the familiar vertigo of choices that carried consequences beyond his ability to predict or control. And if we get caught, then you'll lose your job, and I'll lose my freedom. But if we don't try, I'll lose everything anyway, and the bank my grandfather built will become just another casualty of family greed. The stark honesty of her answer was both terrifying and oddly comforting. At least she wasn't trying to minimize the risks or promise outcomes she couldn't guarantee. In a situation built on deception and manipulation, her directness felt like solid ground. There's something else, Evelyn continued, reaching for a manila envelope on her bedside table. These are the original board resolutions my grandfather signed when he established the community programs. They're binding legal documents, but my family has been quietly circumventing them for months. If the board sees these on Monday, it will be much harder for them to justify their changes. Noah accepted the envelope, feeling the weight of paper and responsibility. You're asking me to become part of this fight. I'm asking you to help me honor a good man's legacy. My grandfather believed that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they had the right support. He built a bank on that principle, and it's worked for 60 years. I'm not ready to let them destroy that because they think quarterly. Profits matter more than community. A sound in the hallway made them both freeze. Voices, footsteps, the particular cadence of people who expected to be obeyed. Evelyn quickly slipped the fountain pen beneath her pillow, and Noah moved toward the window, as if he'd been standing there all along. The door opened to reveal a man in an expensive suit, followed by Victoria Whitmore, and a woman Noah didn't recognize, but who radiated the same corporate authority as the others. "Evelyn, darling." The man's voice carried false warmth layered over genuine irritation. "I wasn't expecting to find you entertaining visitors, especially visitors who aren't on your approved list." Noah recognized him from newspaper photos. Charles Armitage, Evelyn's uncle and the current bank president. Up close, he possessed the particular confidence of someone who'd never doubted his right to make decisions for other people. Uncle Charles. Evelyn's voice remained steady, though Noah could see the tension in her shoulders. "Mr. Benton was just checking on me. Professional courtesy from the bank." How thoughtful. Charles's smile never reached his eyes as he studied Noah with calculating attention. "Though I think we've taken enough of Mr. Benton's valuable time. I'm sure he has important duties to attend to." The dismissal was clear, but Noah found himself reluctant to leave Evelyn alone with people who spoke of her welfare while systematically dismantling her autonomy. "Actually, I was just leaving," Victoria Whitmore interjected smoothly. "As we discussed, Mr. Benton, discretion is so important in situations like these." Noah met Evelyn's eyes for a brief moment, seeing both gratitude and fear in her expression. He nodded slightly, a gesture that could be interpreted as simple acknowledgement, but which carried the weight of a promise. "Feel better, Miss Armitage," he said formally, then walked past her family members with the dignity of someone who belonged exactly where he was. In the elevator, Noah's hands shook as he held the envelope containing the original board resolutions. He was no longer a bystander offering assistance to someone in crisis. He was an active participant in a battle whose outcome would affect not just Evelyn and her family, but hundreds of people who depended on a bank that saw them as neighbors, rather than statistics. As the elevator descended toward the hospital lobby, Noah thought about his grandfather's fountain pen lying hidden beneath Evelyn's pillow, about the documents in his hands, about a golden retriever waiting patiently for his human to come home. Some objects carried more than their physical weight. They carried the accumulated hopes and dreams of everyone who'd been touched by their presence. Tomorrow, Noah would have to figure out how to translate moral certainty into practical action. Tonight, he would read every word of the documents Evelyn had entrusted to him, preparing for a fight he'd never wanted but could no longer avoid. The automatic doors of the hospital opened before him, and Noah stepped into the evening air, carrying the weight of other people's dreams and the growing understanding that sometimes the most important things in life were worth risking everything to protect. The financial documents spread across Noah's kitchen table told a story of systematic theft disguised as prudent management. Hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic language and accounting terminology, Noah could see the careful dismantling of everything Evelyn's grandfather had built. Community loan programs had been restructured into non-existence. Small business development funds had been reallocated to offshore investment accounts. Even the scholarship program that had helped dozens of local kids attend college had been quietly eliminated, its budget absorbed into executive compensation packages. Noah traced his finger along one particular line item that made his stomach turn. Community Development Initiative. Discontinued. Funds transferred to operational efficiency account. Translated from corporate speak, it meant they'd stolen money, meant to help working families, and used it to pay themselves bonuses. "Dad, you've been staring at those papers for 2 hours." Lily looked up from her homework, concern creasing her young face. "Are you okay?" Noah glanced at his daughter, then at Thistle, who lay beside her chair with the patient loyalty of a dog who understood that important work was being done. How did you explain to an 11-year-old that sometimes adults built elaborate systems to steal from each other while pretending to be respectable? Just trying to understand something complicated, Noah said carefully. Sometimes when people have power, they use it in ways that hurt other people, like bullies at school. Sort of, except these bullies wear suits and use lawyers instead of fists. Lily nodded with the solemn understanding of someone who'd learned early that the world wasn't always fair. What are you going to do about it? The question hung in the air like a challenge. What was he going to do? He was a janitor who cleaned offices and emptied trash cans, not a financial investigator or a legal expert. But he was also someone who'd seen too much suffering caused by people who believed their wealth gave them the right to control other people's lives. I'm going to help someone who's trying to stop them, Noah said finally. The lady you saved? Yes. Good. Lily's response was immediate and certain, the moral clarity of childhood cutting through adult complications. If someone's being bullied, you should help them. That evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Noah made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week before. He called Dr. Chen at the hospital, using the number Evelyn had given him. Doctor, this is Noah Benton. I was wondering if we could meet. I have something that might be relevant to Miss Armitage's case. Dr. Chen's voice was cautious but interested. What kind of something? Evidence that her family's concerns about her competency might not be as legitimate as they claim. A long pause. Where are you now? At home. I get off shift in an hour. There's a coffee shop called The Grind on Maple Street. Can you meet me there? The Grind was one of those comfortable neighborhood places that survived on regulars rather than tourist traffic. Noah arrived early, choosing a corner table, where they could speak without being overheard. When Dr. Chen arrived, she looked exactly as he'd expected, tired, concerned, and carrying the weight of someone who'd taken her medical oath seriously. Show me, she said without preamble, settling into the chair across from him. Noah spread out copies of the most damning documents, watching Dr. Chen's expression change from professional curiosity to growing anger as she absorbed the scope of what Evelyn's family had been doing. They've been stealing from community programs for months, Noah explained quietly. Everything Evelyn's been fighting against, everything they've been documenting as evidence of her poor judgment, it was actually her trying to stop them from looting the bank. Dr. Chen leaned back in her chair, her coffee growing cold as she processed the implications. This changes everything. If I can document that her opposition to these irregularities was rational rather than erratic, it undermines their entire competency argument. Can you help her attend the board meeting Monday? Medically, she's stable enough for a few hours outside the hospital. The question is whether I can justify it over her family's objections. Dr. Chen tapped her fingers against the table, thinking. If she had a compelling medical reason to leave, say, severe anxiety about financial matters that could only be addressed by her personal involvement in resolving them, that might provide the necessary justification. Noah felt a surge of hope. Would that work legally? It would give her a chance to speak for herself before they can push through any permanent restrictions on her autonomy. After that, Dr. Chen shrugged, that depends on how compelling her case is and how good her legal representation is. She doesn't have any legal representation. Her family's lawyers have been telling her they're working in her best interests. Dr. Chen's expression darkened. Of course they have. Medical incapacitation combined with legal isolation. It's a classic technique for controlling inconvenient family members. They spent the next hour planning what Noah privately thought of as a carefully orchestrated medical kidnapping. Dr. Chen would find a therapeutic justification for allowing Evelyn to attend the board meeting. Noah would provide transportation and moral support, and together they would give Evelyn one chance to speak for herself before her family could silence her permanently. There's one more thing, Dr. Chen said as they prepared to leave. I've been reviewing her medical records from the past year. The symptoms her family described as evidence of mental instability, the weight loss, the insomnia, the anxiety, they're all consistent with someone under severe chronic stress. If you were fighting this kind of systematic betrayal for months, you'd probably show the same symptoms. Noah thought about Sarah's final year, how the weight of her addiction had manifested in physical symptoms that everyone had interpreted as evidence of her weakness rather than her illness. Sometimes the people who needed help most were the ones whose distress was used as proof that they couldn't be trusted to make their own decisions. On the drive home, Noah found himself thinking about the mechanics of power and how it operated in the shadows of respectable institutions. Evelyn's family wasn't breaking any laws exactly. They were using legal and medical systems as weapons, turning protective mechanisms into tools of oppression. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated both Evelyn's preparation and the power of ordinary people who decided to care about something larger than their own safety. Back at his apartment, Noah spread the documents out again, this time looking for patterns he might have missed. Thistle padded over and laid his head on Noah's foot, a gesture of comfort that seemed to understand the magnitude of what they were. Attempting. "What do you think, boy?" Noah asked quietly. "Are we crazy to take on people with this much power?" Thistle's tail thumped once against the floor. Not exactly an answer, but somehow reassuring nonetheless. Noah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Board meeting moved to Saturday, 10 a.m. emergency session. They're accelerating the timeline. E." Noah stared at the message, feeling his carefully laid plans crumble around him. Saturday was tomorrow. There was no time for careful preparation, no opportunity to build a stronger case or find additional allies. If they were going to act, it had to be immediately. He thought about Lily, sleeping peacefully in the next room, trusting that her father would make good decisions and keep their life stable. He thought about his job, his insurance, the modest but secure existence he'd built after Sarah's death. Then he thought about Evelyn's grandfather's fountain pen, about community programs that had helped hundreds of families, about the difference between being safe and being right. Noah reached for his phone to call Dr. Chen. Tomorrow, he was going. To risk everything he'd built, to help someone he barely knew, fight for something that mattered more than either of their individual lives. The documents rustled as Thistle shifted position, and Noah caught sight of one particular line item he'd overlooked before. Employee Retention and Development Fund reallocated. They hadn't just stolen from the community, they'd stolen from their own employees. Money that was supposed to provide job training and advancement opportunities for people like him. The personal had just become political, and Noah was no longer just helping a stranger in crisis. He was fighting for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't matter enough to have a voice in decisions that affected their lives. The shoebox full of letters arrived Friday morning, delivered by an elderly man named Frank Kowalski, whose weathered hands shook as he placed it on Noah's kitchen table. The return address read simply, "Community Voices," but the contents represented something far more powerful than any corporate financial statement. "My granddaughter heard what you're trying to do," Frank said, his voice carrying the deliberate cadence of someone who'd learned English as a second language but spoke it with careful precision. "She works at the bank, Betty in customer service. She said you might want to see these." Noah opened the first letter, written in the careful script of someone for whom writing was still a formal act. "Dear Miss Armitage, I wanted to thank you for the small business loan that allowed me to open Kowalski's Hardware. Your grandfather approved it in 1987 when the big bank said I was too risky because I was an immigrant. 35 years later, my store has served this community through good times and bad. When Home Depot wanted to build across the street, your bank helped me modernize instead of just selling out. My granddaughter Betty is now studying business because she saw what was possible when people believe in each other instead of just profits. I hear your family wants to change things at the bank. I hope they understand what they'd be giving up. Noah's hands tightened on the letter as he absorbed its implications. This wasn't just about financial statements and corporate governance. It was about the accumulated weight of dreams made possible, of community bonds forged through mutual trust. There are 47 letters in that box, Frank continued. Families who bought their first homes with bank loans when they couldn't qualify anywhere else. Kids who went to college on scholarships your grandfather's programs funded. Small businesses that survived hard times because your bank worked with them instead of foreclosing. Why bring them to me? Because Betty says you're the only one fighting for Miss Armitage, and if she loses, all of this, Frank gestured toward the letters, all of this dies with her. After Frank left, Noah spent the morning reading story after story of lives changed by a banking philosophy that seemed almost quaint in its focus on community over profit. Maria Santos, the veterinarian who'd cared for Thistle, had gotten her first loan to buy the clinic from First National when she was fresh out of veterinary school with massive student debt. The owner of The Grind had expanded his coffee shop with a community development loan that no other bank would consider. Even Lily's school had benefited from an education initiative that Evelyn's family had quietly eliminated 6 months ago. Each letter was both a testament to what was possible and an indictment of what was being lost. Noah found himself thinking about the different kinds of poverty, not just the lack of money, but the absence of opportunity, the scarcity of institutions that saw potential in people rather than risk. His phone rang as he finished the last letter. Dr. Chen's voice was tense with urgency. "Noah, we have a problem. The hospital administration received a formal complaint about my treatment of Miss Armitage. They're conducting an investigation into whether I've been influenced by outside parties to compromise my medical judgment." Noah felt his stomach drop. What does that mean? It means they're trying to remove me from her case before tomorrow's board meeting. If they succeed, her new doctor will almost certainly oppose any request for temporary release. Can they do that? They're doing it. I've been asked to limit my patient interactions to essential medical care only, pending review. No decisions about privileges or releases without administrative approval. Noah stared at the letters spread. Across his table, 47 stories of lives built on trust and mutual support. So what do we do? I'm not sure we can do anything. Without medical clearance, there's no way to get her out of the hospital legally. What about illegally? The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for Noah to wonder if he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "I can't be part of anything that could be construed as kidnapping," Dr. Chen said finally. "My medical license, I understand." Noah's mind raced through possibilities, each more desperate than the last. But what if she just left on her own? She's weak from the dehydration and stress, walking out of a hospital against medical advice, trying to get to a high-stress confrontation with her family. It could genuinely endanger her health. And staying there while they steal everything she's trying to protect is good for her mental health. Another pause. "You're asking me to choose between my professional obligations and my personal convictions. I'm asking you to choose between protecting one person's medical license and protecting a community that's about to lose something irreplaceable." When Dr. Chen spoke again, her voice carried the weight of a decision that would define the kind of doctor and person she wanted to be. If a patient were to experience severe anxiety about her financial situation and request to handle urgent business matters, I might suggest that a brief therapeutic outing, properly supervised, could be beneficial. If that patient then chose to extend her outing beyond my recommendations, you'd have to report it, eventually. But there might be a window, say a few hours, where administrative confusion could delay any immediate response. "Dr. Chen, don't thank me yet. We haven't even tried this. And there are about a dozen ways it could go catastrophically wrong." That afternoon, Noah made arrangements that felt simultaneously necessary and insane. He asked Mrs. Rodriguez to watch Lily after school, claiming a family emergency that wasn't entirely untrue. He called Beverly Martinez and used a week of accumulated sick leave. He even took Thistle to Dr. Santos's clinic, explaining that he needed someone reliable to care for the dog if things went badly. "What exactly are you planning?" Dr. Santos asked, her expression mixing concern with admiration. "I'm planning to help someone fight for something worth fighting for. And if you lose." Noah thought about the letters, about Lily's simple moral clarity, about Evelyn's grandfather's fountain pen lying hidden beneath a hospital pillow. Then at least we'll lose trying to do the right thing. As evening approached, Noah found himself in an unusual state of calm. The frantic planning was done, the desperate preparations complete. Tomorrow would bring either triumph or disaster, but tonight there was only the quiet satisfaction of knowing he'd chosen to matter. Lily sensed the gravity of the situation without understanding its details. Over dinner, she studied her father, with the intensity of someone trying to memorize a face. "Dad, are you going to be okay tomorrow?" "I hope so, sweetheart." "Will the lady you're helping be okay?" "I hope so." "Will you still be my dad no matter what happens?" The question cut through all his careful planning and brought him back to what mattered most. "Always, Lily, no matter what happens, no matter where we end up, I will always be your dad, and you will always be the most important thing in my life." She nodded solemnly, as if filing away another piece of wisdom for future reference. "Then I think you should help her, even if it's scary." That night, Noah lay awake thinking about the different kinds of inheritance people left behind. Evelyn's grandfather had left her a bank, but more importantly, he'd left her a philosophy about how institutions should serve communities rather than exploit them. Sarah had left Noah with grief and beautiful memories, but also with the knowledge that love could survive even the worst circumstances. Tomorrow, Noah would discover what kind of legacy he wanted to leave for Lily. One built on safety and compliance, or one built on the courage to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. The letters were stacked neatly on his kitchen table, 47 stories of lives made better by an institution that had remembered its purpose. Whether those stories would inspire others or become obituaries for a lost way of doing business would be decided in a few hours. Noah closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would either vindicate his faith in the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things, or teach him a painful lesson about the price of taking on forces far more powerful than himself. Either way, he would face it knowing that he'd chosen to fight for something larger than his own security, something worthy of the trust a golden retriever had placed in a stranger who'd stopped to help in the rain. The surveillance camera footage that changed everything was hidden in the most unlikely place, embedded in a USB drive tucked inside Thistle's collar, discovered only when Noah noticed the dog pawing at it with unusual persistence early Saturday morning. Dr. Chen had managed to get Evelyn released for a therapeutic consultation scheduled for 9 a.m., ostensibly to review financial documents that were causing her significant anxiety. The plan was simple. Noah would drive her to the bank board meeting, she would present her case, and they would return to the hospital before anyone realized the consultation had been a cover story. But as Noah sat in his car outside the hospital, at 8:45, watching Evelyn walk slowly toward him with the careful steps of someone still recovering from severe dehydration, Thistle began behaving strangely. The golden retriever, who had been calm and patient throughout the week, suddenly became agitated, pawing repeatedly at his collar and whining with an urgency that demanded attention. "What's wrong with him?" Evelyn asked as she settled into the passenger seat, her face pale but determined. Noah examined the collar more carefully and discovered what looked like a small metal disc sewn into the leather. Not a decoration, but a deliberate modification that clicked open when pressed correctly. "Oh my God," Evelyn breathed as Noah, extracted the USB drive. I forgot about this. My grandfather was paranoid about security in his final years. He had cameras installed throughout the house but never told anyone about them. I thought the system had been removed after he died. What's on it? If it's what I think it is. Evelyn's voice trailed off as the implications hit her. The night I collapsed, I'd been at the family estate for dinner. I remember feeling dizzy, nauseous. I thought it was just stress, but Marcus insisted on driving me partway home. He said he was worried about me driving in that condition. Noah's blood ran cold. I think we need to see what's on this drive before we walk into that boardroom. They drove to the public library, one of the few places open early Saturday morning with computers available for public use. The elderly librarian, who recognized Noah from his regular visits with Lily, didn't question their urgent need to use the technology center. The first several video files showed routine family interactions, dinners, conversations, the mundane documentation of a security system doing its job. But the file dated Tuesday evening, the night Evelyn collapsed, told a different story entirely. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to see Evelyn sitting at the dining room table with her cousin Marcus and Uncle Charles. The audio was distant but audible, and what they heard made Noah's hands clench with rage. "You need to understand, Evelyn," Charles was saying in the reasonable tone of someone explaining simple facts to a slow child. "Your opposition to our restructuring plans has become untenable. The board has lost confidence in your judgment." "The board doesn't know what you've been doing with the community programs," Evelyn replied, her voice strong despite her obvious fatigue. "When they see the financial documents, the board will see what we show them," Marcus interrupted smoothly. "And what we'll show them is a pattern of erratic behavior, poor decision-making, and an inability to prioritize the bank's financial health. That's not what happened, and you know it." "What I know," Marcus said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "is that sometimes people need help accepting reality." The camera angle didn't show exactly what Marcus retrieved from his pocket, but it captured him approaching Evelyn's wine glass, while she was distracted by Charles's continued monologue about family loyalty and fiscal responsibility. "This is happening whether you cooperate or not," Charles continued. "The only question is whether it happens with your dignity intact or whether we have to demonstrate that you're no longer capable of making rational decisions." On screen, Evelyn took another sip of wine, and within minutes her posture began to change. She became visibly disoriented, struggling to follow the conversation, her movements increasingly unsteady. "I don't feel well," she said, her words beginning to slur. "You've been under a lot of stress," Marcus said with false sympathy. "Why don't I drive you partway home? You can call a cab from downtown." "But my car, we'll take care of it. You're in no condition to drive." The footage showed Marcus helping an increasingly unsteady Evelyn toward the door, her movements becoming more erratic with each passing minute. It was clear that whatever he'd put in her wine was designed not just to incapacitate her, but to make her appear mentally unstable to anyone who might witness her condition. "He didn't drive me home," Evelyn whispered, staring at the screen. "He drove me to the bus stop and left me there, in the rain, with Thistle." Noah felt a rage so pure it was almost blinding. "He tried to kill you. Worse, he tried to make it look like I'd had a psychotic break. If you hadn't found me, I would have either died of exposure, which they could blame on my mental instability, or I would have been found in such a condition that no one would question their competency." Petition. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place as they watched Marcus return to the estate, calmly informing Charles that Evelyn had wandered off, despite his attempts to keep her safe. The two men spent several minutes rehearsing their story for the inevitable police questions, refining details about Evelyn's recent erratic behavior and their growing concerns about her mental health. "How did Thistle get the USB drive?" Noah asked. "My grandfather trained him to retrieve important items in emergencies. I must have managed to activate the security system's backup protocol before I became completely incapacitated. Thistle would have automatically collected any new recordings. Noah stared at the frozen image on the computer screen. Two men casually discussing the destruction of their own family member as if it were a minor business inconvenience. This changes everything. Does it? They'll claim the video is fake, or that they were trying to help me, or that my grandfather's paranoid security system misinterpreted their actions. Rich people don't go to jail for this kind of thing, Noah. They pay lawyers to make problems disappear. But it proves you're not incompetent. It proves they've been systematically undermining you. It proves they're criminals. That's different. Evelyn's voice carried the bitter wisdom of someone who'd learned that justice and law weren't always the same thing. The question is whether we can use this to stop them before they complete the takeover. Noah copied the video files to his own USB drive, his mind racing through possibilities. What if we don't just show this to the board? What if we make it public? You mean like releasing it to the media? I mean like playing it at the board meeting, in front of everyone. Let the other board members see exactly what kind of people they're supporting. Evelyn considered this, her expression shifting from despair to something approaching hope. The board meeting is supposed to be private, but there are independent directors, people who aren't family members. If they saw this, they'd have to act. Even if they wanted to ignore it, they couldn't risk being associated with attempted murder disguised as family intervention. It's dangerous, Noah. If we play this publicly and it doesn't work, they'll destroy us both. They have resources we can't compete with. Noah thought about Lily's simple moral clarity, about 47 letters from community members whose lives had been changed by a bank that remembered its purpose, about a golden retriever who'd carried evidence of attempted murder in his collar for nearly a week. Some things are worth the risk, he said quietly, even if it costs you everything, especially then. Evelyn studied his face with the intensity of someone trying to understand a foreign concept. Why? Why are you willing to risk so much for someone you barely know, for a bank you don't even own? Noah considered the question, searching for words to explain something he barely understood himself. Because when I found you in the rain, you trusted me with something important. You didn't know if I was worthy of that trust, but you gave it. Anyway, that means something. That's not enough reason to destroy your life. Maybe not, but watching people with power hurt people without it while pretending to be respectable, that's not a world I want to leave for my daughter. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of decision settling between them like a physical presence. The board meeting was in less than an hour, and whatever choice they made would define not just their own futures, but the future of an institution that had quietly served its community for 60 years. There's something else, Evelyn said finally. If we do this, if we expose them publicly, they won't just come after us legally. They'll come after everyone who supported us, Dr. Chen, the board members who vote against them, even people who wrote letters supporting the bank's community programs. They have long memories and longer reach. Are you trying to talk me out of this? I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're choosing. This isn't just about helping one person anymore. This is about declaring war on people who have spent decades learning how to destroy anyone who threatens their interests. Noah saved the video files and closed the computer, his decision crystallizing with the finality of stepping off a cliff. Then we better make sure we win. As they drove toward the bank, Noah felt the particular clarity that came with crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. He thought about the different kinds of courage, the everyday bravery of getting up and going to work despite disappointment and loss, versus the extraordinary courage of standing up to forces that could destroy everything you'd built. Noah, Evelyn said as they pulled into the bank's parking lot, whatever happens in there, I want you to know that what you've done this week, the way you've treated me like a person instead of a problem, it's changed something fundamental about how I see the world. How's that? I've spent my whole life around people who saw relationships as transactions, who measured loyalty in terms of financial benefit. You stopped to help a stranger in the rain and then risked everything to continue helping, even when it became dangerous. That's not a transaction, that's just human decency. Maybe that's what your grandfather was trying to build with the bank. A place where human decency could compete with profit margins. Maybe it was. Evelyn gripped her grandfather's fountain pen with steady hands. Let's go find out if that's still possible. As they walked toward the bank's entrance, Noah caught sight of several expensive cars in the parking lot. Mercedes, BMWs, a Tesla that probably cost more than he made in 2 years. The Armitage family had come prepared for victory, confident that their careful manipulation would finally eliminate the last obstacle to their profitable restructuring. But they hadn't planned for a golden retriever trained to retrieve evidence, or for a janitor who'd learned that sometimes the most important battles chose you rather than the other way around. The USB drive felt heavy in Noah's pocket, carrying the weight of truth and the possibility of justice. In a few minutes, they would discover whether evidence of attempted murder was enough to overcome decades of institutional power, whether human decency could triumph over calculated greed. Evelyn paused at the bank's entrance, her hand on the brass door handle that had been polished by countless customers over 60 years of community service. "Ready?" she asked. Noah thought about Lily, probably doing homework at Mrs. Rodriguez's house, while her father fought a battle that could change their lives forever. He thought about 47 families whose stories deserved to be honored rather than forgotten. He thought about a woman who'd trusted a stranger with her most desperate moment, and the golden retriever who'd spent a week carrying evidence of a family's betrayal. "Ready," he said, and together they walked into the building where Noah had spent 5 years as invisible maintenance staff, but where he would spend the next hour fighting for the soul of an institution that had forgotten its own purpose. The 4 elevator doors closed behind them, with the finality of choices made and consequences accepted. Whatever happened next would determine not just their individual futures, but whether a community would retain an institution that saw people as neighbors rather than numbers. The original bank charter hung in a frame behind the boardroom's head table, its aged parchment and formal calligraphy a testament to ideals that seemed almost quaint in the modern world of quarterly profit reports and shareholder value maximization. Noah had cleaned this room countless times, but he'd never really read the document that had founded the institution where he worked. Now, as board members filed into their seats, he found himself studying the charter's opening lines: to serve the financial needs of working families and small businesses in our community, with particular attention to those overlooked by larger institutions. Evelyn's grandfather had meant every word. The boardroom buzzed with the particular tension of people who sensed that routine business was about to become something else entirely. Noah recognized several faces from newspaper photos, local business leaders, long-time bank customers who'd been elected to represent community interests, and of course the Armitage family members who'd spent months maneuvering for this moment. Charles Armitage commanded the room's attention with the practiced ease of someone who'd never doubted his right to make decisions for other people. He sat at the head table with Marcus beside him, both men projecting the calm confidence of a plan proceeding exactly as designed. "Before we begin," Charles announced, his voice carrying the formal authority of parliamentary procedure, "I want to acknowledge the challenging circumstances that have brought us together. As you all know, my niece Evelyn has been experiencing significant health issues that have raised serious questions about her continued involvement in bank governance." Noah felt Evelyn's tension beside him as Charles painted a picture of family concern and reluctant intervention. The performance was masterful, every word technically true while completely distorting the underlying reality. "The purpose of today's emergency session," Charles continued, is to address the board's fiduciary responsibility to ensure stable leadership during this difficult transition. We have medical documentation and legal opinions that suggest immediate action is necessary to protect both Evelyn's well-being and the bank's operational integrity. Victoria Whitmore distributed folders to each board member, her movements precise and professional. Noah caught glimpses of psychiatric evaluations, financial analyses, and legal briefs that painted Evelyn as someone whose judgment had become fundamentally compromised. These documents, Charles explained, detail a pattern of increasingly erratic decision-making, emotional instability, and opposition to sound financial practices that predates her recent hospitalization. The medical professionals who've evaluated her situation agree that she requires extended treatment and should not be involved in high-stress financial decision-making during her recovery. Noah watched the independent board members, people like Frank Kowalski's granddaughter Betty, who represented customer interests, and Dr. Margaret Swift, who'd been elected to represent small business concerns. Their expressions showed the careful neutrality of people trying to balance respect for the Armitage family with their own observations of Evelyn's competence. "With respect, Uncle Charles," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the obvious strain of being discussed as if she weren't present. "I'd like to address these concerns directly." "Of course, dear." Charles's smile carried the patronizing warmth of someone humoring a confused child. "But I think we should let the medical professionals speak first. Dr. Harrison has prepared a comprehensive assessment." Dr. Harrison was everything Dr. Chen wasn't, a psychiatric consultant who specialized in competency evaluations for wealthy families dealing with difficult relatives. His presentation was clinically precise and devastating in its implications, painting Evelyn's opposition to the bank's restructuring as evidence of paranoid thinking and poor reality testing. "The patient demonstrates classic signs of stress-induced psychosis," Dr. Harrison concluded, including delusions of persecution, excessive suspicion of family members' motives, and an inability to distinguish between rational business decisions and personal betrayal. These symptoms, combined with her documented history of erratic behavior, suggest that she lacks the capacity for complex financial decision-making. Noah felt the room shifting in response to Dr. Harrison's authoritative presentation. Even the independent board members seemed convinced that they were dealing with a genuine medical crisis rather than a family power struggle. "Dr. Harrison," Evelyn said quietly, "when did you last speak with Dr. Chen, who's been treating my actual medical condition?" "Dr. Chen's role was limited to addressing your immediate physical symptoms. Psychiatric evaluation requires specialized expertise." "And when did you conduct your evaluation of my mental state?" "Based on extensive documentation provided by your family and reviewing your recent behavioral patterns." "So you never actually spoke with me or conducted a direct evaluation?" Dr. Harrison's confident expression flickered slightly. "Direct evaluation wasn't possible given your hospitalization and the urgent nature of these proceedings." Evelyn leaned forward, her grandfather's fountain pen steady in her hand. "Dr. Harrison, what would you say if I told you that my paranoid thinking about my family's motives was actually based on documented evidence of financial irregularities and systematic looting of community programs?" "I would say that's exactly the kind of persecution complex we'd expect to see in someone experiencing stress-induced." "And what would you say," Noah interrupted, standing with the USB drive visible in his hand, "if I told you we have video evidence of exactly why Miss Armitage collapsed Tuesday night?" The room went dead silent. Charles's composed expression cracked for just a moment, revealing something predatory underneath. Marcus had gone pale, his eyes fixed on the drive in Noah's hand. "Mr. Benton," Victoria Whitmore said with icy precision, "you're out of order. This is a private board meeting." "Actually," said Dr. Swift, the small business representative, "I think we should hear what he has to say. If there's evidence relevant to Miss Armitage's condition, don't we have an obligation to review it?" Charles attempted to regain control. "This is clearly an attempt to disrupt legitimate proceedings with unsubstantiated—" "Then let's substantiate it," Evelyn said, connecting the USB drive to the presentation system. "Let's show everyone exactly what kind of family concern led to my hospitalization." The video began playing on the large screen at the front of the room, and Noah watched the board members' expressions change as they witnessed the careful orchestration of Evelyn's drugging and abandonment. The audio was crystal clear. Marcus's casual discussion of making Evelyn appear mentally unstable, Charles's matter-of-fact acceptance of destroying his own niece to protect their financial interests. By the time the footage reached Marcus helping an increasingly incapacitated Evelyn toward the door, several board members were staring at the Armitage family with undisguised horror. "This is clearly a fabrication," Charles said, but his voice lacked its earlier authority. "A desperate attempt to—" "Uncle Charles," Evelyn said, her voice carrying new strength, "the timestamp is visible. The location is your dining room. That's your voice discussing my erratic behavior while Marcus drugs my wine." Betty Walsh from customer service was the first to find her voice. "Are you telling us that you deliberately incapacitated your own family member and abandoned her in the rain?" "We were trying to help her," Marcus said weakly. "She was having an episode." "You caused the episode," Dr. Swift interrupted, her professional composure giving way to moral outrage. "You chemically induced the exact symptoms you're now using to claim she's incompetent." Noah felt the room's energy shifting as the board members absorbed the full implications of what they'd witnessed. This wasn't just attempted murder. It was a calculated scheme to steal control of an institution while destroying the person standing in their way. "There's more," Evelyn said, producing the financial documents Noah had helped her gather. "The erratic behavior they've been documenting was actually my attempts to stop them from embezzling community program funds and redirecting them to offshore accounts." She spread the papers across the table, highlighting the systematic dismantling of everything her grandfather had built. The employee development funds, the small business loans, the scholarship programs, all eliminated to boost profit margins and executive compensation. "The incompetency petition isn't about my mental health," Evelyn continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. "It's about silencing the only person with legal standing to expose what they've been doing to this institution." Frank Kowalski, representing community interests, leaned forward with the intensity of someone whose entire worldview was shifting. "How long has this been going on?" 2 years, Evelyn replied. "Ever since they realized I wouldn't simply rubber-stamp their plans to sell to First Interstate." "Sell?" Dr. Swift's voice carried sharp alarm. "There's been no discussion of selling the bank." Charles attempted one final deflection. "There have been preliminary discussions about maximizing shareholder value by destroying everything." "That makes this bank different from every other profit-driven institution," Evelyn interrupted. "By eliminating the community programs, tightening lending standards to exclude working families, and eventually selling to a corporation that will close half our branches and lay off most of our employees." Noah watched the faces around the table as the full scope of the Armitage family's plan became clear. These weren't just financial crimes, they were community betrayals. The systematic destruction of relationships and trust that had been built over 60 years. "The letters," Noah said suddenly, remembering the shoebox Frank had delivered. "Show them the letters." Evelyn nodded and began reading from the community responses. 47 stories of lives changed by a bank that had remembered its purpose. Of families and businesses that existed because someone had been willing to see potential rather than just risk. "This is what they want to destroy," she said, her voice carrying the accumulated weight of all those stories. "Not just a bank, but a philosophy about how financial institutions should serve communities rather than exploit them. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft sound of Dr. Harrison gathering his papers and quietly leaving the room. Even he seemed to understand that his psychiatric evaluation had become irrelevant in the face of documented criminal behavior. Charles made one last attempt to maintain control. These accusations are serious, but they don't change the fundamental question of Evelyn's capacity to... The fundamental question, Betty Walsh interrupted, is whether this board is going to allow itself to be part of a criminal conspiracy, or whether we're going to protect the institution we're supposed to serve. Noah felt something shifting in the room's atmosphere, a collective recognition that they had reached a moment of decision that would define not just the bank's future, but their own moral legacy. The video evidence, the financial documents, and the community letters had created an undeniable picture of systematic betrayal, disguised as family concern. But as he watched Charles and Marcus exchange glances, Noah realized that desperate people, with unlimited resources, rarely surrendered gracefully. The revelation of their crimes might have exposed their plans, but it had also cornered them in a way that could make them even more dangerous. The real battle was just beginning. The bank's original charter seemed to pulse with renewed life as the board members absorbed the full weight of what they'd witnessed. Noah watched Frank Kowalski trace his finger along the document's opening lines, his weathered face reflecting the kind of moral clarity that came from a lifetime of honest work and community service. 60 years, Frank said quietly, his accented English carrying the weight of personal history. 60 years my family has banked here because this place understood that trust goes both ways. You're telling me these men tried to murder their own niece to steal what her grandfather built? That's exactly what we're telling you, Dr. Swift replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. And if we allow this to continue, everything this institution represents dies with their success. Charles Armitage had retreated into cold calculation, his earlier warmth replaced by the predatory focus of someone whose carefully constructed plan was collapsing. These accusations are serious enough to require a formal investigation. Until that investigation is complete, I move that the board consider immediate interim leadership to protect the bank's interests. You mean your interests? Betty Walsh shot back. You just watched a video of yourself discussing how to destroy your own niece, and you're still trying to steal control of her inheritance? Marcus attempted his own damage control. The video lacks context. Evelyn has been unstable for months. Stop! Evelyn's voice cut through the room like a blade. She stood slowly, her grandfather's fountain pen steady in her hand, and Noah saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Not just determination, but the quiet authority of someone who'd finally stepped fully into their power. You've had months to build your case against me, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. Months to document my erratic behavior and poor judgment, but you made one critical mistake. She gestured toward the USB drive. You forgot that grandfather didn't just leave me a bank. He left me the tools to protect it. Charles's composed mask slipped further. Evelyn, you're clearly still suffering from the effects of being poisoned by my own cousin. Evelyn's interruption carried the sharp edge of someone who'd had enough of other people's lies. Of being abandoned in the rain to die of exposure so you could claim I'd had a psychotic break? The room erupted as board members began talking over each other, voices rising with moral outrage and practical concerns. Noah found himself in the surreal position of watching the controlled environment of corporate governance dissolve into something approaching righteous anger. Enough! Dr. Swift's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. We have clear evidence of attempted murder and systematic embezzlement. The question isn't whether Evelyn is competent. The question is whether Charles and Marcus should be arrested before they can destroy more evidence. You're overreacting, Victoria Whitmore interjected, though her usual confidence seemed strained. These are complex family dynamics that require careful— These are crimes, Betty Walsh interrupted, and if we don't act immediately, we're complicit in covering them up. Noah felt the momentum shifting, but he also saw something dangerous in Charles's expression, the cold fury of someone who'd been outmaneuvered but wasn't ready to surrender. "There's something else," Noah said, producing the box of community letters. 47 families wrote about how this bank changed their lives, about what it means to have an institution that remembers its purpose. He began reading Frank's letter about his hardware store, Maria Santos's story about becoming a veterinarian, the coffee shop owner's gratitude for a loan that had saved his business during the recession. Each story was a testament to the philosophy Charles and Marcus wanted to destroy. "This is what you're really voting on," Noah continued, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who discovered what he was willing to fight for. "Not just whether one family gets to steal from another, but whether this community gets to keep an institution that actually serves people instead of exploiting them." Charles stood abruptly, his face flushed with rage. "Mr. Benton, you are out of order. This is a private board meeting, and you have no standing to—" "He has every standing," Evelyn interrupted. "As of this morning, Noah Benton is the bank's new Director of Community Outreach, with full board voting privileges as outlined in the original charter." The silence that followed was profound. Noah stared at Evelyn in shock, while Charles's expression shifted from anger to something approaching panic. "That position hasn't existed for 15 years, Victoria Whitmore said weakly. "Because you eliminated it," Evelyn replied. "But the charter requires community representation on the board. By appointing Mr. Benton to that position, I'm restoring a fundamental safeguard my grandfather built into the institution's governance." Frank Kowalski began to smile, his eyes bright with understanding. "So now we have someone on the board who actually understands what this bank means to working families." "This is irregular," Charles began. "This is justice," Dr. Swift interrupted, "and frankly, it's long overdue." Noah felt the weight of unexpected responsibility settling on his shoulders. A week ago, he'd been invisible maintenance staff. Now he was being asked to help govern an institution whose decisions affected hundreds of families. "I accept," he said quietly, thinking about Lily's simple moral clarity and 47 letters from people who'd been helped by someone willing to see their potential. The board members looked at each other with the recognition that they'd reached a moment of irreversible choice. The evidence was clear, the stakes were understood, and the time for compromise had passed. "I call for an immediate vote," Betty Walsh said, "all in favor of removing Charles Armitage and Marcus Armitage from all positions of authority pending criminal investigation." The hands went up around the table. Frank, Dr. Swift, Betty, and finally, after a moment of visible internal struggle, 2 other independent directors who'd been silent throughout the confrontation. Charles stared at the raised hands with the expression of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "You have no idea what you're up against." But as Noah looked around the table at the faces of people who'd chosen to protect something larger than their own interests, he realized that sometimes the most important battles were won not by the people with the most resources, but by the people with the clearest understanding of what was worth fighting for. The community pledge cards arrived like a small miracle, delivered by Dr. Santos just as the board was preparing to formalize their vote. She carried a manila envelope thick with handwritten commitments from families throughout the community, promises to keep their accounts at First National, to recommend the bank to friends and neighbors, to support the institution that had supported them. 347 signatures, Dr. Santos announced, spreading the cards across the boardroom table. Mrs. Rodriguez organized it. When word got out about what Mr. Benton was trying to do, people wanted to show their support. Noah stared at the cards with something approaching awe. Each one represented a family that had chosen to stand with them, people who understood that some institutions were worth fighting to preserve. The simple act of signing their names had transformed abstract principles into concrete community commitment. "This is what we're really voting to protect," Evelyn said, her voice carrying new strength as she looked at the accumulated pledges. Not just a bank, but a network of relationships built on trust and mutual support. Charles Armitage surveyed the scene with barely concealed fury, his composure finally cracking completely. "You think a few hundred signatures from customers changes anything? You think sentimentality can compete with economic reality?" "I think," Frank Kowalski said quietly, "that you've forgotten what economic reality looks like for people who don't inherit their wealth." The formal vote proceeded with the gravity of people who understood they were making history. Each board member spoke before casting their decision, their words carrying the weight of personal conviction and community responsibility. Betty Walsh went first. "I vote to remove Charles and Marcus Armitage from all positions of authority and to support Evelyn Armitage's continued leadership of this institution. This bank belongs to the community it serves, not to the family that happens to own it." Dr. Swift followed. "I second that motion and add my support for the immediate restoration of all community programs that have been eliminated or reduced over the past 2 years. A bank's success should be measured by the lives it improves, not just the profits it generates." Frank Kowalski's vote carried the accumulated wisdom of 60 years of community membership. "I vote yes, and I want to say something else. My grandfather came to this country with nothing but hope and willingness to work. Mr. Armitage's grandfather gave him a chance when no one else would. That's not sentimentality. That's how communities survive and grow. One by one, the independent. Directors added their voices to the growing consensus. Even the 2 board members who'd remained silent throughout the confrontation finally spoke up, their reluctance overcome by the undeniable evidence of systematic betrayal. When the final vote was tallied, Charles and Marcus Armitage had been stripped of all authority by a margin that left no room for appeal or legal challenge. The board had spoken with the unified voice of a community that had rediscovered its values. "The vote is unanimous," Evelyn announced, though her voice carried exhaustion alongside triumph. "Charles and Marcus Armitage are hereby removed from all positions within the bank pending criminal investigation. All changes to community programs made without proper board approval are reversed effective immediately." Victoria Whitmore gathered her papers with the precise movements of someone calculating legal strategies. "This institution will face serious challenges going forward. Banking regulations, federal oversight, the practical difficulties of maintaining unprofitable community programs." "Then we'll face them together," Noah interrupted, surprising himself with his confidence. "The same way communities have always faced challenges, by supporting each other instead of abandoning each other." Charles stood to leave, his defeat complete, but his anger undiminished. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice carrying the cold promise of ongoing warfare. "This bank will fail within 2 years, and when it does, every family that loses their savings will be on your heads." "Uncle Charles," Evelyn said quietly, "if our failure comes from trying to serve our community instead of exploiting it, then we'll fail with honor. That's more than you can say." After the Armitage family left, the remaining board members sat in contemplative silence, absorbing the magnitude of what they'd accomplished and the challenges that lay ahead. They'd won the battle, but they all understood that winning the war would require sustained commitment and community support. "So what happens now?" Dr. Santos asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. "Now we prove that a community bank can still thrive in the modern world," Evelyn replied, her grandfather's fountain pen steady in her hand. "We restore the programs they eliminated, we rebuild trust with families they've alienated, and we show that financial institutions can measure success by more than quarterly profits." Noah looked around the table at the faces of people who'd chosen principle over profit, community over personal advancement. "And we do it together," he said. "No, one person built this institution and no one person can save it. But a community working together, that's how institutions survive." Betty Walsh smiled for the first time that day. "Mr. Benton, I think you're going to fit right in as our Director of Community Outreach." As the board members prepared to leave, each carrying the weight of decisions that would reshape not just the bank, but their own understanding of civic responsibility, Noah felt a profound sense of completion. A week ago, he'd been a janitor trying to help a stranger in crisis. Now he was part of an institution dedicated to helping entire communities realize their potential. The pledge cards remained spread across the table like evidence of democracy. In action, hundreds of families choosing to support something larger than their individual interests. It was, Noah realized, exactly the kind of quiet heroism that Evelyn's grandfather had built his bank to serve. Outside the boardroom windows, the town square stretched under afternoon sunlight, filled with the ordinary activity of people going about their daily lives. Most of them had no idea that their community bank had just been saved from systematic destruction, that a group of ordinary people had chosen to fight for something worth preserving. But they would learn, Noah thought. And in learning, they would understand that sometimes the most important battles were fought not by the powerful, but by the people who remembered what communities were supposed to do for each other. 6 months later, the family photo sat on Noah's desk in what had once been a storage closet, but was now the community outreach office of First National Bank. The image captured a moment of pure joy. Noah and Evelyn standing together at the community center's grand reopening, with Lily beaming between them and Thistle sitting regally at their feet, his golden coat gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. It was, Noah reflected, an unlikely family portrait. The former janitor and the bank heiress, the 11-year-old who wanted to be a veterinarian and the golden retriever who'd carried evidence of attempted murder in his collar. But the bonds between them had been forged in crisis and strengthened by shared purpose, creating something that felt more authentic than many traditional families. "Dad, the Henderson family is here for their loan closing," Lily announced from the office doorway, her voice carrying the professional competence of someone who'd spent the summer learning the banking business from the ground up. At 11, she already understood more about community finance than most adults, and her natural empathy made her invaluable in helping nervous borrowers navigate the process. Noah looked up from the loan application he'd been reviewing, a request from Maria Santos to expand her veterinary clinic to include a low-cost spay and neuter program. 6 months ago, such a loan would have been impossible under the bank's profit-focused policies. Now, it represented exactly the kind of community investment that Evelyn's grandfather had envisioned. The Henderson family, a young couple with twin toddlers, had been trying to buy their first home for 2 years, repeatedly rejected by larger banks that saw only risk in their modest income and limited credit history. First National saw potential, customers who would grow with the community, parents who deserved the stability of home ownership, workers whose dreams aligned with the bank's mission. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson," Noah said, rising to greet them with the warmth he'd learned from years of customer service. "Congratulations on your new home. Let's get these papers signed so you can start building memories." The closing took an hour, filled with tears of gratitude from parents who'd never expected to own anything more substantial than their apartment lease. Noah watched their children explore the office with wide-eyed curiosity, their innocent joy a reminder of why the fight to save the bank had mattered. "Mr. Benton," Mrs. Henderson said as they prepared to leave, "I know this probably sounds silly, but our kids are going to grow up knowing that someone believed in us when no one else would. That means more than just having a house. It means being part of a community that sees our potential. After they left, Noah found Evelyn in her grandfather's old office, reviewing quarterly reports that told a story of modest but sustainable growth. The community programs had been fully restored, employee development funds had been expanded, and the bank was actually showing improved performance as customer loyalty translated into increased business. The State Banking Commission is pleased with our progress, Evelyn said, looking up from the financial statements. They're holding us up as an example of how community banks can thrive by remembering their core mission. And the investigation into your uncle and Marcus. Federal charges were filed last week. Mail fraud, wire fraud, attempted murder. The prosecutors say they have enough evidence for multiple felony convictions. Evelyn's voice carried no satisfaction, only the quiet sadness of family relationships destroyed by greed. Marcus is cooperating, hoping for a reduced sentence. Uncle Charles is still fighting, but the video evidence is pretty compelling. Noah settled into the comfortable chair across from her desk, marveling at how natural their working partnership had become. They complemented each other perfectly, her institutional knowledge and his community connections, her strategic thinking and his practical wisdom, her inherited authority and his earned credibility. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Evelyn considered. The question with the careful thought she brought to all important matters. About exposing them, none. About the cost to our family relationships, every day. But I learned something important from you, Noah. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones who hurt you most, while strangers who stop to help in the rain become the family you actually need. Their relationship had evolved slowly. Over the months, professional respect growing into genuine affection and eventually into something deeper. Neither had rushed the progression. Both understood that the best foundations were built carefully, with attention to the needs of everyone involved. Lily had been the first to voice what they'd all been thinking. "Are you and Evelyn going to get married?" she'd asked one evening over dinner, her directness cutting through adult complications with typical 11-year-old efficiency. "Would you like that?" Noah had asked carefully. "I think it would be good for all of us," Lily had replied with the wisdom of someone who'd learned early that families came in many forms. "Besides, Thistle likes it when we're all together." The golden retriever in question was currently sprawled across the office floor, dividing his attention between Noah and Evelyn with the contentment of a dog who'd found his permanent pack. Dr. Santos had declared him the most well-adjusted rescue she'd ever seen, though she admitted his experience was somewhat unique. "The community celebration is starting soon," Evelyn said, checking her watch. "Are you ready to face your public?" Noah laughed, still amazed by how much his life had changed. The community center's reopening represented more than just restored funding. It symbolized the triumph of collective action over individual greed, the power of ordinary people to protect extraordinary institutions. The walk from the bank to the community center took them past familiar landmarks that looked different now, not because they'd physically changed, but because Noah saw them through the eyes of someone who'd learned to recognize his own agency in shaping the world around him. Frank Kowalski's hardware store displayed a banner thanking First National for supporting local business. The coffee shop had expanded into the adjacent storefront, its growth funded by a community development loan. Even Lily's school looked different, knowing that the educational initiatives they'd restored would help countless children pursue their dreams. The community center buzzed with the energy of a neighborhood celebration. Families who'd benefited from the bank's restored programs mingled with longtime customers who'd never doubted the institution's value. Children played in the renovated playground, while adults shared stories about loans that had changed their lives. "There's our hero!" Betty Walsh called out as Noah and Evelyn approached, her voice carrying across the crowd. "The man who reminded us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things." Noah felt the familiar embarrassment of public recognition, but he'd learned to accept it gracefully. The story of his role in saving the bank had spread throughout the community, not as mythology, but as proof that individual actions could have collective consequences. Dr. Chen approached with her characteristic blend of professional competence and personal warmth. "Noah, Evelyn, I'm so glad to see you both looking so healthy and happy. We have you to thank for that," Evelyn replied sincerely. "Without your medical advocacy, none of this would have been possible. I just did my job. Sometimes that means protecting patients from their own families." As the afternoon progressed, Noah found himself surrounded by people whose lives had intersected with his in unexpected ways. The security guard who'd unlocked the bank that first morning, the librarian who'd helped them access the video evidence, the veterinarian who'd cared for Thistle when his human couldn't. Each conversation reminded him that communities were built on countless small interactions, moments of mutual aid and recognition that created networks of support stronger than any individual ambition. "Dad," Lily said, tugging on his sleeve, "they want you to make a speech." Noah looked at the expectant faces around him, friends, neighbors, customers who'd become something approaching family. 6 months ago, he would have been terrified by such attention. Now he understood that leadership sometimes meant simply articulating what others were feeling. "I'm not good at speeches," he began, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet crowd. "But I've learned something important over the past few months. We often think that change has to come from people with power, people with money, people with influence. But sometimes the most important changes come from people who simply decide to care about something larger than themselves." He gestured toward the renovated community center, toward the families gathered around them. "Everything we're celebrating today happened because people chose to stand together instead of standing apart, because they believed that institutions should serve communities rather than exploit them, because they understood that real strength comes not from standing tall alone, but from standing with others." The applause that followed was warm and sustained, but Noah felt its real meaning in the faces around him, recognition that they'd all been part of something significant, that their individual choices had combined to create collective change. As the celebration continued into the evening, Noah found himself standing with Evelyn and Lily near the playground, watching Thistle interact with the children who'd already adopted him as the community center's unofficial mascot. "What are you thinking about?" Evelyn asked, following his gaze. "I'm thinking about inheritance," Noah replied. "Not the kind that gets passed down through wills and legal documents, but the kind that gets created through the choices we make every day, the legacy we leave by how we treat each other, by what we choose to build together." Lily leaned against his side with the casual affection of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. "Are you happy, Dad?" Noah looked at his daughter, at Evelyn, at Thistle, at the community celebration surrounding them. 6 months ago, he'd been a janitor trying to make ends meet, invisible to most of the people whose lives he quietly maintained. Now he was part of something larger, not because he'd sought power or recognition, but because he'd chosen to help when help was needed. "I'm happy," he said simply, "and more than that, I'm proud of all of us." The family photo in his office captured one moment, but the real picture was larger and more complex. A community that had rediscovered its values, an institution that had remembered its purpose, and a group of people who'd learned that the most important battles were fought not for personal gain, but for principles worth preserving. As darkness settled over the celebration and families began heading home, Noah realized that the story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose between self-interest and community. Good, new chances to prove that ordinary people could protect extraordinary things. But tonight, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand together, Noah Benton was content to be exactly where he was, home.